To have people joining us today with some very interesting backgrounds who have been writing a book about hacking bureaucracy. I'll explain a little bit more what that means in a moment, but first, let me give you a little bit of background on our guest today. First up, we've got Marina Nitze, who is currently a partner at Layer Aleph, a crisis response firm for software systems. Marina is also a fellow at America's New Practice Lab, where she works on improving America's foster care system, and is most recently the chief technology officer of the U.S. Department of Veteran Affairs under President Obama, after serving as a senior advisor on technology in the Obama White House and as the first entrepreneur in residence at the U.S. Department of Education. She's also an active board member and advisor for multiple companies. She's joined by her co-author, Nick Sinai, who's a senior advisor at the VC and private equity firm Insight Partners. He's an active board member for multiple companies, and quite notably, Nick served as the U.S. Deputy Chief Technology Officer at the Obama White House, and prior played a key role in crafting the National Broadband Plan at the FCC. He's also very passionate about helping others be successful, both through his educational roles and most recently by co-authoring a book with Marina that promises to help you get things done no matter what role on any team. So, needless to say, I think we're very fortunate to have the two of them, these experienced guests today with us to discuss what lessons they've learned, not just about navigating the complex, multi-layered systems and processes of bluntly some of the largest and potentially slowest moving bureaucratic organizations in the world, but actually thriving in it and, by their own words, hacking bureaucracy. And I'm going to leave it to them to really give you the details of that. And here we go with another week of O Ship. Welcome to O Ship. How are you?
Thanks for having us.
So glad you're here today. I'm really looking forward to digging in. Again, I just gave your book a great 5-star and justifiably earned review on Amazon, and I think you just really touching on a really important subject for a lot of people in America and frankly across the world. I think a great way to get to know the both of you and understand why you've ventured out on writing a book about the subject would be maybe understanding a little bit more about your personal backgrounds that would inspire you to write this book. Marina, maybe start with you. I'd love to hear what inspired you to go down this path.
Absolutely. So I joined the federal government in America 10 years ago. Nick was actually my first boss through something called
Awesome.
the Presidential Innovation Fellows Program. And I was really convinced at the time that government was irreparably broken. You couldn't fix it. You couldn't do anything to make it better. And I was there to prove that I was right. However, I was really, really wrong. And I learned from people like Nick and a lot of other colleagues that there were actually ways you could make incredible change and impact at scale if you learned how the bureaucracy actually worked. And this really culminated for me in a meeting. I got called in with President Obama in a cabinet meeting to answer to him why I was making such slow progress at the VA, which was a pretty terrifying meeting to get
Yeah.
called into. But even in that moment, I realized, like, oh my gosh, the leader of the free world himself can't even get through IT approval paperwork. You actually have to get through the IT approval paperwork. And so that really inspired us to kind of put together this book that said, hey, there's possible to make change, but there's certain ways to go about it. So we really wanted to share a lot of stories in that vein.
Amazing. How about you, Nick?
I had the great opportunity and privilege to serve 4 years in the Obama White House, and I've been teaching at the Kennedy School ever since. And I also work in venture capital. And so I see people who are tremendously successful, public and private, and you are complete, and you try and understand, like, well, what's the common pattern there? And Marina and just keeping these tactic stories, startups to Fortune 10 size enterprise. And so we just thought we wanted to share the world, and we're really excited to do so.
I have to ask, Marina, what was it like working for the Obama administration?
I learned a lot. I mean, there were a lot of people that were really good at getting things done, and they understood how you had to map out your stakeholders, what it took to really make change with people across the aisle. And also, the scale is tremendous, right? If you're working in the federal government, uh, I now work with a lot of Fortune 10, 500 companies in my IT crisis consulting. I work with state foster care agencies, but nothing is the scale of like working at the VA. There, I had 350,000 full-time employees as colleagues.
Wow.
And we had a multi-billion dollar IT budget alone. So the scale was really tremendous.
I feel like for those of us who love reading the news, and I'm a news junkie. Obviously, the challenges of the VA have been very prevalent for a long time. Um, I'd love to hear an example of when you think about um, taking on some of the kind of these, to quote you guys from your book, you've taken on some of the world's most challenging bureaucracies. Obviously, the VA would be a wonderful example of that. What is it exactly? Does it mean to win against bureaucracy?
Well, maybe I'll tell one story here. So, as you said, VA was always on the front page of the newspaper, never for anything good, although that's really changed. There's something called the
Yes, I
SAM
agree.
the Sammys are like the government equivalent of Emmys or Grammys, and the VA has won 2 of the last 3 years, which is pretty incredible for amazing customer service. Veteran trust has gone up 25%. So the VA is really it's incredible to look back on the last 9 years since I started there, and by no means did I accomplish all of it myself. I worked with a lot of amazing people, but one story would be the VA was on the front page of the New York Times for having a backlog of healthcare application claims. So there were 800,000 pending paper applications from veterans that were trying to get healthcare. And the auditors assumed that over 100,000 of them had died waiting for their application to be processed, which is unforgivable and criminal.
Yeah, crazy.
And the VA had an online application at the time, but only 8 veterans out of America's estimated 20 million veterans, only 8 had ever used it. And so the VA believed that, veterans don't use the internet. Obviously, that's what the data showed. And I just wasn't willing to accept that. And so my
That
team
sounds crazy on a side note.
sat with real veterans that were really trying to apply for healthcare and revealed that the reason only 8 had ever applied online, which was a much more efficient way to apply in theory, was that the application and the website was so old that it required you to have an ancient computer and an ancient version of Adobe Reader to actually open it. And so we piloted a very, very simple web form, not machine learning, not advanced technology, a very, very simple web form that got the information that the VA needed to enroll you, sat and tested it with real veterans, got them on video saying that they would use it over anything the VA had to offer, which was sort of a funny quote, and then rolled it out. And 2 million veterans have since used that form on their mobile phone to enroll in VA healthcare, which is pretty tremendous.
That's amazing. Nick, I'd love to hear. Do you have another example of how you feel like you've kind of conquered or won against bureaucracy?
Yeah, I think that for me, people, and so I've of kind of people flow efforts book, which is how do you bring additional energy to an organization? And so we started the Presidential Innovation Fellows, and in fact, Marina was those fellows who took a chance, which paired outside entrepreneurs with inside change. Really important to kind of marry the institutional knowledge with the and more recently, I've helped do this with the U.S. Digital Corps, which is an early career fellowship for young tech. Much because not only did they come in and do something of real importance, but Serena, after her stint at the Department of Education, then went on to be Chief Technology Officer of the VA. I will add at age 28, so we broke just about every rule in the book. But the
That's
VA is
amazing.
so much better for it. And there's now the Fellows program is in law, it was bipartisan legislation, and so it really is a good example where the alumni have gone on to really important things in government.
Love that. And so, I guess, how did you go from a place of saying these are challenges we're solving every day to like I need to write a book about this and to tell everyone else what we learned? I guess we'll start with you, Nick.
Well, for one of these, I guess for me, I spend a lot of time with my students at the Harvard Kennedy School, and so I seem to be having the same conversations over and over again, and kind of set of tips. And part of this was just a hack of maybe I could just hand them a copy of the book. Uh, but wanted to tell the stories of all of our friends and colleagues and people that we admire. And so there's so much kind of behind the scenes in any organization. Too often people on TV and they see an organization, like a President Obama, who is a singular and very impressive dude, by the way. But there are thousands of people inside the bureaucracy of the White House and millions of people inside the bureaucracy of the executive branch. And there's some real good stories about how to build them, how to build a team, how to prototype, whether you're talking about a policy or whatever, and how do you actually use the bureaucracy against itself. The book Judo, not because it's the site. How do you actually get the organization, the rhythms of an organization, of how do you understand those, and then you not only get your product, get your initiative off the ground, but also make systemic change, and that's really what hacking your bureaucracy means.
Hey, Marina, Nick mentioned a moment ago that one of the key things you guys tried to communicate in the book was basically stories from other people that you admire and respect in the in their experience, kind of hacking bureaucracy. Is there some examples you could give outside of your outside of some of the ones you specifically mentioned from your own kind of remit of kind of bureaucracy just really bringing a firm or a business just kind of to a halt? Yeah, the worst examples of bureaucracy, obviously, if you know what I mean.
I mean, I think so. In the course of writing this book, Nick and I tried to find a place that wasn't a bureaucracy, and this led us to a co-op grocery store in Berkeley, California. And it turns out it also is a bureaucracy that has rules, unwritten and written, that everybody has to follow, and different incentives. And so I think we are all mired in bureaucracy all the time. And I think there's probably no shortage of times that we all feel pretty stressed out in a bureaucracy. Maybe I'll tell one story from my friend Dr. Lucia Coulter.
Love
That
that.
was actually so she's a doctor. She felt like she actually wasn't making enough impact in the world as a doctor, which is crazy. And she wanted to help end lead exposure for children. And lead paint is delicious. I don't know if your listeners know that, which is why it's so dangerous, because kids like to eat it.
Is it
And
really delicious? Or are you
it's
being
really
funny?
delicious. I mean, I have not personally eaten it, but that is the report of
I'm sorry.
why it is so dangerous. And but in America and in Canada and many countries, it's been banned for like over 50 years. So it's
Yeah,
not something
yeah.
that people think about. And but Lucia kept seeing it as a problem in Africa, and people just wouldn't engage in the conversation. So she went to the store, bought paint, and had it tested for lead. Cost maybe $100. And look at that. In Malawi, there was lead paint on the shelves everywhere. And in response to that, the presence of data that hadn't existed before, the government there put lead paint regulations in place in a matter of months, which government cannot really move at that speed, and it did. And yet she went to Botswana, and it turns out they don't have lead paint because they import from South Africa that had banned lead paint a long time ago. And so by just going out and surfacing some seemingly basic data, here's lead paint. You didn't think it was there, but here it is. She was able to, and is continuing to change, I mean, many countries, and the lives of potentially millions of children.
On a side note, I'm stunned they sell lead paint anywhere in the world still, and that's kind of amazing that people are still finding that kind of stuff. And now, on a terrible note, I'm also kind of bizarrely intrigued at what lead paint tastes like. So
I can't
thanks for
recommend it.
seeing that one out in the world. That's hilarious. Well, I'll tell you what I'd love to do. I want to jump into some of the very specific lessons and strategies that you have learned and put out in the book. So, could you share some of the things that so maybe some of the favorite strategies or favorite tips that you would give people as they're starting to think about how they can make a change within any organization? Maybe start with you, Marina.
Yeah. So book has 56 of them, but my favorite is definitely look between the silos. So the larger and the older a bureaucracy is, the more that there are going to be steps or departments or teams that are very siloed, right? We're all familiar with that concept. And they have a lot of defensive antibodies up against change. They may not want you to come in at all. They may not want, and they certainly probably don't want you to make change. But in the handoffs between the silos is really where there's tremendous opportunity to make change, because nobody is defending the space in between the silos. And I'll tell you a story around this. So these days I work in foster care, and one of my projects is helping states streamline their foster parent application process, because it tends to take hundreds of days, during which time kids are literally sleeping on office floors or living in institutions when there are available families who just can't get through the paperwork process. And so to look between the silos, what you need to do is start and finish a real process following a real person or a real claim. It's really important that you can't do this conceptually. You can't go through and talk to everybody at a step abstractly about what they're doing. You need to follow a real claim or person or application. So I'm doing this in a particular state, and I get to a step where the woman is requesting the applicant's driving record from the DMV. And she pulls out carbon copy paper, which maybe some of your audience is not even old enough to remember. You press really hard through multiple colors. And then she's like, I have to find a stamp and an envelope. And like, the DMV, they live in the 19th century. Why are they making me fill out this carbon copy paper?
Yeah.
And I did what she was not empowered to do, which was I then went to the DMV and said, hey, can you show me how you're processing this driving record application? And the woman's like, oh, absolutely. I pull up my electronic system, I get the requests in over on the left, and then I respond to them same day. And I was like, well, wait a minute. I saw some carbon copy paper. Where does that come in? And she said, oh my God, you were at child welfare. Those people live in the 19th century. Why do they keep sending me this stupid carbon copy paper when they could just email their requests? And I was like, please hold, and ran back across the street. And in an afternoon was able to remove a step that nobody wanted to do and shave 32 days off an application process. And I have about a million stories like that. Like, this tactic keeps working for me again and again in my work. And it's something that anybody can do, no matter what your role is in an organization. If you're new, if you've been there for 20 years, you can follow something from start to finish and find the opportunities between the silos.
Why do you think that why do people keep these really obsolete things in their system? Like what makes something get stuck like that? That's so clearly insane.
Yeah.
You know?
I think about this a lot, and what comes down to it is that very often nobody owns the end-to-end process at all. So no, it's never anybody's job to see that handoff step. It's never anybody's job to look at the entire process from start to finish and think about how it can have improved customer service or improved timeliness or improved data quality. And that's why it's such an amazing ripe area for bureaucracy hacking, because you can often find things that are completely not controversial that nobody wants to do anymore, or that have been obsolete for decades, but it's never anybody's job to find them. So if you can make it part of your job to find them, you may be really surprised by the impact you can make.
Yeah, I'm still stunned by some of the, orgs that I run with, and they're like, "Can you fax it to us?" I'm like, "I can't email it." They're like, "No, no, you have to fax it to us." I'm like, "Really?" Like, so it's just kind of crazy. And do you think to your point that some of this is about people not owning some of the steps, but is this like organizational design? You know what I mean? Is this like flaws to the org design, and then maybe to your point, you were talking about the VA having 350,000 employees, which is hard for most of us, including me, to even wrap my head around. I've worked in some multiple tens of thousands of companies, and I felt that was pretty huge. And I guess it just it must be really hard to not only design an org that big, but also to then change an org that big.
Yeah, I think a lot of people have a belief that large storied bureaucracies are designed to, say, deny people benefits. I think a lot of people believe that the government is designed to keep people from getting benefits, or to, reduce the spend of taxpayer dollars. But I think the reality is they aren't designed at all, and that's different. And so a question that we've actually been asked as we've been talking about the book, that's been pretty intriguing to me, is how do you prevent becoming a bureaucracy? And I think we have two responses to that. First is everything is a bureaucracy in some sense. And we consider the term to be a bit more neutral as opposed to a four-letter word, which is some people have accused it of being.
That's fair
But
enough.
if you want to keep the bureaucracy from getting in the way of progress, one of the really key things you can do is design your bureaucracy, rather than think that if you don't do anything, it will somehow not exist or not get in the way. And really, a key there is understanding end to end. When you have a process, forgetting about the 17 teams in the middle, that may own different steps. Somebody has to own the process, design the process, have key performance indicators around that process. And that's what I think can really keep a bureaucracy from getting in the way and can even enable a bureaucracy to deliver better, faster outcomes.
Mhm. One of the to your point, a bureaucracy doesn't have to be a 300,000 person organization. There is bureaucracy at every level of companies. It's and hopefully I'm doing this definition justice, but it's the systems, it's the processes, it's the design, and bureaucracy is designed on some level to slow things down to make sure there's smart decision making happening, so people aren't impulsive and but at the same time that can get out of control like most things in this world. And so Nick, turning to you, if you were to think about, let's say, 100-person company, which probably reflects a huge number of people out there, and that's really starting to build, I think that's around that size company where you really start more and more systems and processes and tools are starting to come in as people are scaling up their companies. How do you would you recommend on a far more simpler level, like an everyday member of a team, maybe a member of a team of 10 or 15 people, where they feel like they struggle to impact change because maybe they're more junior in the role, they're not a key decision maker? How would you coach that person to affect change within their own organization?
Yeah, I'm a big fan of showing your work and just being transparent. And I thought you were going to ask me, like, how should you company? What are some tips to prevent the organization from becoming a bureaucracy?
We
So
could talk about that too.
just thinking there that how can you bring yeah. So in that I was thinking about how do you do things concurrently rather than sequentially, right? And sometimes hey, it's got to go up these different levels of hierarchy, or this got to clear than this person clear, or can you actually have a transparent process? And so just a couple examples. Uh, in the White House, we had ex Google and ex Twitter folks who came in, and so they said, hey, even in a trying to launch policy and regulations and initiatives, you can still think about what a launch calendar looks like, where you have a tight set of folks, and the launch calendar is transparent to everyone, rather than kind of this my part and I pass it on, but not everybody knows, right? So that was a product launch example. Another one would be from Google, this idea of snippets, right? Can you actually and snippets is this idea of essentially bullet update on what you're working on and what your blockers are, that kind of
Mhm,
thing. Not dissimilar from what you
mhm,
might say in a step, but instead of having meetings where someone's giving the status update and you spend the whole meeting on the status, can you put that in written form and share with people, and even take the first 5 minutes of the meeting for people to scan those bullet points so that you're able to have a much more informed full meeting. So there's things like that I think regarding transparency, regarding how you work, that it's important that tone at 50 or 100 people, because pretty soon, if you're a successful company, you're at 250, 500, 1,000 people, and it's a lot harder to change
mhm,
those kinds of things. For an individual, I would say yes, hierarchy, but your idea, and to the extent that you can show those ideas, so write them down, write a one pager. We've talked about this in the book. What a very rudimentary prototype is. Get out of the office and have a single customer or product tell you something. Record that as a video, or write it down, and just that quote or that video can be super powerful. So it's you don't need to do the whole thing. Is show a small piece of it and show it to your boss, but also show it transparently to your team and to the company to the extent the culture allows. And I think that can help you build some momentum and get enthusiasm. Ultimately, making change is about getting people to champion your ideas, to provide additional people, resources to help you be more successful. And you have to show that you're going to make some progress rather than just talk
mhm,
about it. So we're a big fan of writing it down. We're a big fan of actually demos and showing your work, and showing what the customer or experience would be, so that people get excited about that and then they want to move forward rather than kind of arguing about it in the abstract.
What you mentioned culture a couple times there, and again, I've never certainly never worked in the government space, and I've never worked in an organization to the scale that that both of you have been discussing. Do Marina, do organizations of that side, do they have, I guess, everything as culture, but what does culture look like in an org of that size, and can you kind of hack culture to drive outcomes, if that makes sense?
Yeah, there was so much talk when I was at the VA around culture change, and especially as we were creating the US digital service to bring technologists in for their own tours of duty. There was a lot of discussion about this. And the only thing I've ever seen work on that is the delivery is the strategy, which we borrow from the UK, actually.
Mhm,
You can't change culture, at least not, I've never seen it work with PowerPoints and meetings and like rah
yeah,
rah situations. You have to change the metrics, you have to change the performance plans, you have to change the
mhm,
words that you're saying, and then you have to change what you're rewarding, and that's what changes culture. People deeply respond to incentives, and this is something that we cover in many ways in the book. I don't mean to sound overly manipulative, but you need to understand each person where they are in the decision making process. This is usually not actually reflected on an org chart or written down, so it's a different sort of investigation you need to do. And then you need to understand what each person is incentivized by and what each person considers risky. Do they want
mhm,
recognition? Do they not want recognition? Do they, what does their performance plan say that they're expected to do? Are you
mhm,
asking them to do something that, from their perspective, they could get investigated for long after you're gone, which was something that I encountered a lot? And then how can you change that risk? How can you change the process or the paperwork or the performance plan or the criteria to make the path of least resistance and least risk the path that
mhm.
you want people to take?
Yeah. It's really interesting. You know, a lot of times when people talk about culture, to your point, I don't, yeah, yeah, maybe not quite the kind of rah rah, but the concept there's personalities, there's energy, there's a energy, you know, these feelings that define like how people interact with each other, and there hits a scale where that's just not possible to extend that. You know, fit different physical locations. Just frankly, the scale becomes impossible. I feel like you can have cultures within teams, like a more the kind of cultures that people normally associate with that kind of that word in a corporate environment. But then the incentives, which are a little less emotional, those are universal truths, and I see how you can apply those at scale. One of the interesting things you touched on in the book that I'd love to hear a little bit more about, you talked a little bit about kind of, you know, never letting a good crisis go to waste. And obviously, I think there's a fair share of those, especially when it seems like dealing with government agencies. But Marina, I'd love to hear a little bit more about what you and Nick meant when you referenced that.
Yeah. So I think different organizations will respond differently to a crisis. In the case of early VA, we had so many crises that it actually didn't really respond very much.
Yeah.
You'd think that that would be a time when you relax the rules and let things happen, but that was not so much the case. However, sometimes, like the healthcare story I told earlier, it was very highly motivated to work through that backlog and get all those veterans healthcare. And
Mm,
so we were able to use that crisis to say, hey, is this enough so Marina can run a pilot? Not so Marina can, announce she's going to change overnight, but can I
mm,
just run a pilot over here? Can I
mm,
just talk to a few veterans? And that was enough of an opening. And
mm,
oftentimes in a crisis, you may have a plan. You may have the one pager that Nick talked about and a vision for how it's going to happen, but the timing may just not be right. And however, if you're prepared, there's that great quote, right? Chance favors the prepared mind. That you
mm,
don't know when that crisis hits, and it has something to do with what you're up to. It may unlock budget, headcount, prioritization, focus, whatever it may be, that now it may be the time to unlock it. And so we want to encourage people to be ready so that if a crisis happens, and obviously we don't know that it's going to happen, or that's not how crises work,
yeah.
then you're prepared to be the solver.
I think that's great. You know, great advice. Again, the crises can be periods of, let's call it, intense transformation, and so you can ride the wave, or you can sit and watch the wave from the side. Um, so I feel like since we're talking about crises, now is as good as any time to ask you about your O-ship question. And for those of you that have been tuning into O-ship for the first time today, you know, a huge part of O-ship was originally born out of this concept that sometimes things go wrong on your path to success, and how people deal with them uh, is really interesting. I think that a lot of people look at people solving big challenges who've had some success in their careers or in their businesses, and assume that it's a very straightforward path from A to B, but the path to success is very rarely a straight line. And so, whether there's moments of oh ship moments, as we call them, when things kind of go off the rails, some people that shapes who they are as a leader, some people it changes how they operate on a day-to-day basis, and some people are just thankful they survived it and makes a bloody funny story in hindsight. So, Nick, I'd love to start with you. Is there a moment that you can share from your career, or even for the book, maybe other stories you've seen out there, that you think is kind of a great moment of where you've seen it kind of all go off the rails, and how people have handled it?
Yeah, there's a couple oh shit moments in the book. I'll tell them both quickly regarding some of my screw ups in government. One, when I first started government at the FCC, I had been working on this question of energy data, and should consumers be able to get access to their own electric usage data from their utilities. And I had been working with folks on the Hill, some staffers in Congress, and they had incorporated some of my ideas into legislation. So I was very proud that a congressman and senator had released some legislation, and they invited me to testify as an expert witness, which is kind of a big deal if
Yeah.
you're a staffer inside of an organization like the FCC, and especially because I was new to government too, so I was feeling quite full of myself and quite proud. And then the FCC did not let me testify because I had been going behind the back of the Office of Legislative Affairs, and so it was a good oh shit moment where I realized I had not been building the authentic relationship with the people who were the experts about the Hill, even though
Yeah.
that I was a subject matter expert about this
Yeah.
particular topic. The other story that I'll tell real quickly is I got thrown out of the White House Science Fair. The White House Science Fair is in the Obama administration is a annual event where young kids and teenagers present a bunch of Lego robots and
Yeah.
science experiments to the president, and so it's a very very fun and cool event every year. And I had managed to slip into the green room, which, as you may know, has green wallpaper and is kind of this very fancy room. There was just one scientist there. This was actually an adult scientist, one other staffer, and I was excited to kind of watch the president spend a few minutes with the scientist. It's very rare to kind of be in a room with just the president. There may be a meeting where you're in with 5 or 10 or 15 people. It's just one of these kind of intimate moments. And a senior staffer came in and basically demanded what I was doing there, and I stuttered, trying to explain that I helped set it up or something, which wasn't quite the case, and I got thrown out of the science fair because I was committing cardinal sin of being a tourist. And so, help or get out of the way.
Yeah.
Don't be a tourist.
Yeah, that's funny. I don't know if there's any worse party to get thrown out of, so to speak. But did the president actually come in the room when you got chucked out, or was it the staffer got in there before you and chucked you out?
Yeah. So this is the social secretary who's her job was basically to do exactly that. So I don't want to say anything other than breathe, to bend your
Yeah,
knees, to relax, because people will faint or get very, very excited about meeting the president. But her job is also to make sure that there aren't
yeah,
unnecessary staff who are just kind of trying to hang in
yeah,
intimate moments.
floating around.
So she kicked me out, and then before the president came in.
It's funny. Yeah, I never really thought about that, but I think it's a makes sense. You've got to prep people, because I can imagine people really losing their mind before meeting the president, or just nerves hitting them. Probably not. Probably at least a couple people a year hit the floor, probably as the president comes in. So I see you nodding in agreement, Marina. I'd love to hear, if you got a no ship story you can share with us.
Yeah, mine's a little more circuitous, but it was when the application process opened for the Presidential Innovation Fellows, which is how I came into government, and I was part of the first cohort. I literally cried in my apartment because I thought I was so unqualified and I had made so many poor life choices. I had started my own IT company when I was 12, which sounds fancy, but that meant that by the time college came around, I tried to go to college and also work full time, and it didn't work, so I dropped out. And then I was an entrepreneur, so I was only self employed. I never had a boss or an office job. It was a kind of a struggle to even put down a reference, and so here was this amazing opportunity to like come into government and work on something cool. And I was like, I will never be qualified for this. But they said if you sent in your resume, they'd add you to their email list. So I still sent in my resume, assuming I would never hear back, and really upset about the poor life choices that I had made. And then I ended up getting picked. So that worked out okay. But I don't want anybody to think that I had some perfectly planned out path, which I had thought would be my life, right? Like you finish high school and you go off to Harvard, and then you keep getting graduate degrees, and then that's how you be successful. And it turns out there are a few different paths.
I love that. You don't hear about people that typically kind of classic entrepreneurial minds going into big government like that. If you were speaking to another young entrepreneurially minded person, is there some specific advice you'd give them, or or would it just be read my book? That should cover it.
Uh, no, I think it would not be read the book so much as I think there's so many ways for an entrepreneur to get involved in and make a difference in government. Maybe the book has a lot of stories of hope and ideas. And I'd probably have some specific advice depending on their interests of where they might go to deploy that entrepreneurial talent, because not every part of government is the right fit and not every role would be the right fit, but there are a lot more spots than you might think at first that could really bring a tremendous amount of benefit. And uh, it's a good way to sleep at night knowing that you had a material hand in helping 2 million veterans get health care, or helping a bunch of foster kids not sleep on the floor of a lobby and live in homes and families, or ideally not even end up in foster care in the first place. Those are some pretty good feelings at the end of the day that I encourage everyone to try out as part of their own career path.
I would feel good about that too. So again, hats off to you and Nick on some of the really cool things you've both done in your career. Out of interest, do you think the government needs more entrepreneurs?
Yes, at every level, to include, I think, there have been some great programs that Nick had a hand in building: the Presidential Innovation Fellows, the Digital Core. There's the United States Digital Service. But at the local and state level, I think there's a lot of opportunity where you can have an even more outsized impact, right? Because it's smaller, and simply the number of decision points or people that you have to talk to is less to bring about big change.
As a last and kind of final subject, I'd love to get into today, for those of you who've been listening to Ship for a while, I'm about to embark on my own journey of writing a book, so I'm very very intrigued. So for someone writing a book who's ever even thought about writing a book, what was the hardest part of the process? Let's start with you, Marina.
Oh boy, for me, the hardest part of the process has been selling the book, because I'm sort of shy,
That's
and so
funny.
I have to keep going out and doing and talking and working that out. But I
Mhm.
think what I'd encourage in terms of advice, when we first started writing the book, it was going to be a 12 chapter kind of traditional format, and that was a real struggle because we had so many stories and tactics, and we were sort of artificially jamming them into different categories. And we were so lucky to have these amazing editors, and Dan and Allison, who said, "Hey, what if you write a 56 chapter book instead, where every chapter is short?" And that really, I think, lent itself much better to our message. And so I just encourage, maybe think a little bit outside the box of what the right format is. Every book does not have to be 12 chapters demonstrably, right? There's plenty of books that
Mhm.
are
Mhm.
formatted like ours. And so I would encourage thinking about that.
Some flexibility in it, and so it sounds like you don't struggle to kind of find the time to put pen to paper then?
I found writing smaller chapters much easier than writing longer
Yeah,
chapters. And also,
that makes
everyone has
sense.
their own technique. I mean, Nick is someone that likes working every day a little bit on the book, and I'm someone that likes to have a real big mug of coffee and like
Yeah,
plow through a
you
12
you
or a
go you
14.
go on benders.
Yeah,
You're like,
yeah.
"Tonight, it's going down." Like 12 hours.
So knowing how you work, I think, is important, because I don't work well in the daily chunks, but again, someone else would really not work
I
well in the
I
12-hour
I
chunk. So
I think it's a product of my OCD, but I'm with you on that. Like, I find that, like, in an hour is, I kind of, I use that to knock out really short focus things, but once I, what they call getting into the zone, Like sometimes I struggle to stop working when I'm like that, but I can knock out insane amounts of work because I'm just like it's just when it's flowing, it's flowing. But I'm worried about working on the book because I do feel like sometimes when I'm not, and this is why I'm not a professional book writer, but it's like say you can't like with creative people, it's like you can't just be when you're feeling it. You gotta make it happen. So Nick,
But
any advice from you for anyone who's ever thought about writing a book or what it might mean to go out there and do that?
I don't think I had recognized how much uh, writing a book was selling a book. I will author is a for anyone. And the other thing is you got to make progress, right? You got to get at it. And so it was one of those things where I just had that sheer terror of like, now we've signed a contract, now we have 9 months, and the more you get to down on paper, the more you can spend time revising and etc. So don't wait till the end, Freddie.
Okay. Well, I'm at the I've got a lot of pent up energy of a subject I'm dying to get out. I think that's what inspired myself and my co-authors to want to do that. So I want to thank both of you again for joining me today. I really enjoyed it. I think your book is fantastic. I think so for those people out there who haven't had a chance to read it yet, they can get it at hackyourbureaucracy.com. I bought myself mine on Amazon and got it straight to my Kindle, but obviously people can get it in whatever format they want. But if people want to learn more about you and they want to follow you or find you, what's the best way for them to do that?
all our bios and social media profiles, et cetera, are on the website at
Okay.
hackyourbureaucracy.com. So would welcome connecting.
Awesome. That keeps it nice and easy. And then again, for those of you listening to Oship right now, I want to just thank you for tuning in. For those of you who come here every week, whether you're listening live or watching live on any of our social platforms like YouTube, Facebook, LinkedIn, Twitter, or you are tuning in via any of our audio podcasts on any of the platforms we stream on, thank you, thank you, thank you. We really appreciate your support. And the best thing you can do to continue to support the show is tell a friend, leave a comment, engage in chat, leave something in the on the post show, and we'll respond to you there. And if you've got an idea for a great guest, let us know. We'd love to hear from you. And so finally, just want to thank you both one more time, and I wish you great success in your book. And hopefully, we'll have you back on when the sequel comes out. So, thanks again for your time, and thanks everyone for tuning into our ship. Bye, Nick.
Thanks
Bye,
for having
Marina.
us.
Our pleasure.
Thanks, Freddie.